Hello, happy Friday. We've gotten through another week of distance learning, and I hope everyone's family is safe and healthy and doing well in this time. I'm very glad to be back with all of you, at least by video today, to read you another chapter of our story. So we're on chapter 6, which is called In Which the Wizards Do Some Snooping and Cimorene Snoops Back. For the next 3 weeks, Cimorene spent most of her free time studying the fireproofing spell and collecting the ingredients she would need to cast it. A few, like the wolfsbane and feverfew, she could gather herself from the herbs that grew on the slopes of the mountains. Alienora found a little jar of hippopotamus oil among the cosmetics left by her predecessor. The unicorn water Cimorene got from Morwen after promising her a copy of the spell if it worked. She went to Kazul about the white eagle feathers, though she was a little afraid to explain what she wanted them for. She didn't want Kazul to think she was worried about Kazul losing her temper and accidentally roasting her. Fortunately, the dragon found the whole idea very interesting. It could be very useful, Kazul said reflectively. There are enough hot-tempered youngsters around that it would be well worth fireproofing the princesses who have to deal with them. I'm not sure I'll be able to fireproof anyone at all, Cimorene said. I still need the white eagle feathers and the powdered hen's teeth, and no one seems to have any. I'll see what I can do, Kazul said, and a few days later she dropped a bundle of white feathers at the door of the kitchen. Half a feather was stuck to one of her right claws, and another was caught between two of her teeth, and she looked very pleased with herself. Cimorene decided not to ask any awkward questions. Even Kazul, however, could not find any hen's teeth, so Cimorene kept putting off trying out the spell. When she wasn't working on collecting the ingredients for the fireproofing spell, Cimorene read the Historia Dracorum. It was very difficult at first. After all, it had been a long time since her last Latin lesson. She kept working on it until she started to remember the right endings for the declensions and the conjugations and cases. Shortly after, she realized she was not having to look up quite as many words as she had at the beginning. From then on, her progress was rapid. Oh, looks like we have a visitor. Nefer, come on. From then on, she found her progress was rapid. It helped that she found the book fascinating. Dragon history was not a subject commonly taught to princesses in Linderwall, but as she was now a dragon's princess, she had a personal reason to be interested. Besides, the history of dragons was very exciting. Every page was full of descriptions of dragons ravaging villages, carrying off princesses, defeating knights and princes, and occasionally being defeated by them, and fighting with wizards, giants, and each other. When the book wasn't describing battles, it was describing famous dragons' hordes and peculiar draconian customs. Cimorene was in the library with the Historia Dracorum in front of her and her Latin dictionary on the table beside her left hand when she heard someone calling from the front of the cave. She had hoped it would be at least a little longer before the knights started coming back, so she couldn't help sighing as she stuck a leather bookmark in the book and closed it. Then she went out to argue with whoever it was until they went away. 2 wizards were standing just outside the mouth of the cave. Cimorene saw their wooden staffs first because she was close enough to see their faces. As she came near, she recognized the one on the left as Zeminar. The one on the right was taller and younger. His brown hair and beard showed no trace of gray. His blue and brown robes were identical to the older wizards, except for the colors. His eyes were the same bright black as his companions, and he looked at Cimorene in a way that made her feel uneasy. "Good morning to you, Princess Cimorene," Zeminar said. "I thought I would take you up on your kind invitation to visit. I hope we haven't come at an inconvenient time." "Not at all," Cimorene said, thinking hard. She had promised Kazul that she would try to find out what Zeminar was after if he showed up, and here he was. Maybe if she convinced him that she was as silly as her sisters, he would be careless enough to let something slip. "I thought perhaps we might have, since it took you so long to come out," Zeminar said mildly, but Cimorene thought there was a hint of suspicion in his eyes. I must not have heard you right away, Cimorene said, batting her eyelashes innocently, the way her next youngest sister did whenever she had done something particularly foolish. Kazul has quite a large set of caves, and I was in one of the ones in the back. I'm so sorry. Ah, Zeminar stroked his beard with his left hand. That would make it difficult for you. Perhaps we could set up a spell for you, one that would let you know whenever anyone comes to visit. It would be more pleasant for visitors, too, if they didn't have to shout. What do you think, Antarel? Like the one at the headquarters of the society, the second wizard said, nodding. We could do it in 2 or 3 minutes, right from here. It would be easy. Zeminar shot a dark look at his companion. Cimorene was sure that he'd wanted to pretend he was inventing a difficult new spell so that he would have the excuse to wander around Kazul's caves. Quite so, said Zeminar. Well, Princess? Oh dear, I don't know, Cimorene said, doing her best to imitate the way her eldest sister behaved whenever anyone wanted her to decide anything. It sounds very nice, but Kazul is so picky about where things go and how things are done. No, I couldn't. I simply couldn't let you do anything like that without asking Kazul first. What a pity, Zeminar said. His companion coughed and shuffled his feet. Ah, yes. Allow me to present my son, Antarel. I hope you don't mind me bringing him along. Of course not, Cimorene said politely. I am pleased to make the acquaintance of such a lovely princess, Antarel said, bowing. Cimorene blinked. This wasn't getting anywhere. Maybe if she brought them inside, they'd relax a little. Thank you, she said to Antarel. Won't you come in and have some tea? We would be delighted, Zeminar said quickly, if you'll lead the way, Princess. This way, Cimorene said. She stopped just inside the mouth of the cave and gave the wizards her sweetest and most innocent smile. You can leave your staffs right here. Just lean them up against the wall. Antarel looked considerably startled, and Zeminar frowned. Is this, too, something your dragon requires? He said. I don't know, Cimorene said, wrinkling up her forehead the way her third from eldest sister did whenever she was puzzled, which was often. But they'll be so awkward in the kitchen. Don't you think so? There's not very much room. We'll manage, Zeminar said. Cimorene hadn't really expected to get the wizards to let go of their staffs, but it had been worth a try. She shrugged and smiled and led them on into the kitchen, where she made a point of bumping into the staffs or tripping over them every time she went by. Finally, Antarel turned his sideways and stuck it under the table. Zeminar hung on to his with a kind of grim, suspicious stubbornness that made Cimorene wonder whether she was fooling him at all with her pretended silliness. The wizards made uncomfortable conversation about the weather and the size of the kitchen for several minutes while Cimorene fixed tea and poured it. Are the rest of Kazul's caves this large? Zeminar asked as Cimorene handed him a teacup. She had given him the one with the broken handle, even though he was a guest, because she didn't trust him. Oh, yes, Cimorene said. She was beginning to think she was never going to find out anything. The two wizards seemed perfectly happy to sit at the kitchen table and talk about nothing whatever for hours. Remarkable, Antarel said in an admiring tone. You know, we wizards don't often get to see the inside of a dragon's cave. I'll bet you don't, thought Cimorene as she gave him a puzzled look. That's too bad, she said aloud. Yes, it is, Zeminar said. Perhaps you'd be willing to show us around. Cimorene thought very rapidly. It was obvious she wasn't going to learn anything if the wizards just sat at the kitchen table and drank tea, so she decided to take a chance. Well, she said in a doubtful tone, I suppose it would be all right as long as I don't take you into the treasure rooms. That's fine, Antarel said a little too quickly. You won't touch anything, will you? Cimorene said as they stood up. Kazul is so particular about where things are kept. Of course not, Zeminar said, smiling insincerely. Cimorene smiled back and led the way out into the hall. She watched the wizards carefully as she took them through the large main cave, the general storage caverns, and the big cavern where Kazul visited with the other dragons. Zeminar made polite noises about the size and comfort of everything, but neither he nor Antarel seemed very interested. And this is the library, Cimorene said, throwing open the door. I am impressed, Zeminar said, and Cimorene could tell that this time he meant it. She stepped sideways so she could keep an eye on both of the wizards at the same time. A remarkable collection, Antarel commented. He began walking around the room, admiring the bookshelves and scanning the titles of the books. What's this? Zeminar said, bending over the table. The Historia Dracorum? A surprising choice for light reading, Princess. His eyes met Cimorene's, and they were hard, bright, and suspicious. Oh, I'm not reading it, Cimorene said hastily, opening her eyes very wide. I just thought it would make the library look nicer to have a book or two sitting out on the table. More lived in. Zeminar nodded, looking relieved and faintly contemptuous. I think it works very well, Princess, he said, very well indeed. Then he looked over at the other side of the room and said sharply, Antarel, what are you doing? Cimorene turned her head in time to see Antarel put out a hand and deliberately tip several books off the shelves. Stop that, she said, forgetting to sound silly. I'm very sorry, Princess, Antarel said. Will you help me put them back where they belong? Cimorene had no choice but to go over and help him. It took several minutes to get everything back in place because Antarel kept dropping things. Cimorene got quite annoyed with him and finally did it all herself. As she started to turn back to the center of the room, she caught a glimpse of Zeminar hastily closing the Historia Dracorum. Cimorene pretended not to notice, but she made a mental note that he had been looking at something near the middle of the book. That was dreadfully careless of you, Cimorene said, frowning at Antarel. Very clumsy, Zeminar agreed. I don't know what Kazul will say when she finds out about it, Cimorene went on. Really, it is too bad of you. I did ask you not to touch anything, you know. Yes, you did, Zeminar said, and I wouldn't like to think that we had gotten you in trouble. Perhaps it would be best to not mention to Kazul that we were here at all. I suppose I could do that, Cimorene said in a doubtful tone. Of course you can, Antarel said encouragingly, and I'll come back in a few days to make sure everything's all right. I think it's time we were on our way, Zeminar said, giving his son a dark look. Thank you for showing us around, Princess. Cimorene escorted them out of the cave and made sure they had left, then hurried back to the library. She spent the next several hours poring over the middle parts of the Historia Dracorum, trying to figure out what Zeminar had been looking at. She was still there when Kazul arrived home and called out for her. That wizard Zeminar finally came, and he brought his son along with him, Cimorene said as she came out of the library. I know, said Kazul. Her voice sounded a little thick, as if she had a cold. I could smell them the minute I walked in. Is that why you sound so odd? Cimorene asked. You're not going to sneeze, are you? I don't think so, Kazul replied. Don't worry about it. I'll have plenty of time to turn my head away. I wish I could get some of the hen's teeth, Cimorene said, frowning. That fireproofing spell. Have you looked in the treasure rooms? Kazul asked. No, Cimorene replied, startled. She remembered seeing a number of jars and bottles of various shapes and sizes when she had been organizing the treasure, and none of them had been labeled. I didn't think of it, and besides, it's your treasure. You're my princess, at least until someone rescues you or I decide otherwise, Kazul pointed out. Go ahead and look, because if you find any hen's teeth, use them. Be careful when you're checking the jars, though. There are one or two with lead stoppers that shouldn't be opened. Lead stoppers, Cimorene said. I'll remember that. Good. Now what did the wizards want? I'm not sure. Cimorene explained everything that had happened, including how she had seen Zeminar closing the history book as she turned, and how the two wizards had been perfectly willing to leave right after that. But just before they disappeared, Antarel said he might come back another time, Cimorene concluded, so I don't know whether they found what they were looking for or not. Do you know which part of the Historia Dracorum Zeminar was reading? Kazul asked. Somewhere in the middle, a little past my bookmark, Cimorene replied. I was just looking at it when you came in. It's the part about how the dragons came to the Mountains of Mourning and settled in the caves and chose a king. That's the section where the Historia describes the caves of fire and night, isn't it? Kazul said. Cimorene nodded. There was a whole page about somebody finding a stone in the caves so that dragons could pick a king. It didn't make much sense to me. Colin's stone, Kazul said, nodding. We've used it to choose our king ever since the first time. When the king dies, all the dragons go to the Ford of Whispering Snakes in the Enchanted Forest and take turns trying to move Colin's stone from there to the Vanishing Mountain. The one that succeeds is the next king. What if there are 2 dragons strong enough to move it? Cimorene asked curiously. It's not a matter of strength, Kazul said. Colin's stone isn't that much larger than you are. Even a small dragon could carry that much weight twice around the Enchanted Forest without any trouble at all. But Colin's stone has an aura, a kind of vibration. When you carry it, you can feel it humming through your claws, and the humming gets stronger the further you go until your bones are shaking. Most dragons have to drop it or be shaken to pieces, but there's always one who is suited to the stone. For that dragon, the stone's humming is just a pleasant buzz, so of course it's easy to get it to the Vanishing Mountain. You sound as if you've had experience, Cimorene said. Of course, Kazul responded matter-of-factly. I was old enough to participate in the tests when the last king died. She smiled reminiscently. I got farther than anyone expected me to, though I wasn't one of the top 10 by any means. Cimorene tilted her head to one side, considering. I think I'm glad you didn't win. Oh, why is that? Kazul sounded amused. Because you wouldn't have had any use for a princess if you were queen of the dragons, and if you hadn't decided to take me on, that yellow-green Morans would probably have eaten me, Cimorene explained. You mean if I were king of the dragons, Kazul corrected her. Queen of the dragons is a dull job. But you're a female, Cimorene said. If you'd carried Colin's stone from the Ford of Whispering Snakes to the Vanishing Mountains, you'd have had to be a queen, wouldn't you? No, of course not, Kazul said. Queen of the Dragons is a totally different job from king, and it's one I'm not particularly suited to. Most people aren't. I think that the position's been vacant since Oran tore his wing and had to retire. But King Tokos is a male dragon, Cimorene said, then frowned. Isn't he? Yes, but that has nothing to do with it, Kazul said a little testily. King is the name of the job. It doesn't matter who holds it. Cimorene stopped and thought for a moment. You mean that dragons don't care whether their king is male or female? The title is the same no matter who the ruler is. That's right. We like to keep things simple. Oh. Cimorene decided to return to the original topic of conversation before the dragon's simple ideas confused her anymore. Why would the wizards be interested in Colin's stone if it's only used for picking out the kings of the dragons? I doubt they are, Kazul replied. However, Colin's stone was found in the caves of Fire and Night, and wizards have always been interested in the caves. But the dragons control most of them, and all the easy entrances are ours, so the wizards have never been able to find out as much as they would like. The Historia Dracorum is one of the few books that talks about the caves at all, and there aren't many copies. I'll wager Zeminar would have stolen it outright if he thought he could get away with it. I thought dragons let wizards into the caves of Fire and Night, Cimorene objected. Why would Zeminar be poking through history books looking for information if he can just go and look at him whenever he wants to? We don't let wizards visit the caves whenever they want, Kazul said. If we did, they'd be running in and out all the time, and nobody would be able to breathe without sneezing. No, they're limited to certain days and times, and if they want to visit the caves of Fire and Night otherwise, they have to use one of the entrances we don't control. Few of them try. The other ways of getting into the caves are very dangerous, even for wizards. Maybe they're looking for an easier way in. Kazul did not seem to be paying much attention. She thought for a moment, then turned towards the cave mouth. I'm going to see Gorham. Roxham said a book had been stolen from her library, and I want to know which one. I'll be back in a few hours. I think I'll look at the Historia Dracorum again while you're gone, Cimorene said thoughtfully. If there is something useful in it about the caves of Fire and Night, maybe I can find it now that I know what I'm looking for. Cimorene spent the rest of the afternoon carefully translating the chapter that talked about the caves. She was disappointed to find there was very little about the caves themselves, though what was there was interesting. The book told how the dragons had discovered the way back into the caves and described some of the things they had found in them. Caverns full of blue and green fire, pools of black liquid that would cast a cloud of darkness for 20 miles around if you poured 3 drops of it on the ground, walls made of crystal that multiplied every sound 1,000-fold, rocks that spurted fire when they were broken. Most of the rest of the chapter was about Colin's stone and how it was taken out of the caves by the first king of the dragons. Kazul returned just before dinner, and she and Cimorene compared notes. Cimorene told Kazul what she had learned from the chapter on the caves of fire and night, and Kazul explained what she had learned from Gorum. The stolen book was the Kings of the Dragons, and the entire first section was about Colin's stone and the caves of fire and night, Kazul said. And only a wizard could have gotten past the spells and safeguards Gorum puts on her library. I think that settles it. The wizards are definitely collecting information about the caves of fire and night. Then why do they keep looking at books of dragon history, Cimorene asks. It seems like a roundabout way of finding out whatever it is they want to know. There isn't any other way to do it, Kazul said. Nobody but dragons has ever had much to do with the caves, and no one has written much about them except in dragon histories. Even the wizards weren't particularly interested in them until a few years ago, except as a reliable route into the enchanted forest. But from what I've been reading in the Historia Dracorum, the caves sound fascinating, Cimorene said. You mean to say that no one has ever written anything about the caves of fire and night except dragons? That's... Kazul stopped suddenly and her eyes narrowed. No, that's not right. There was a rather rumpled scholar who talked his way into the caves a century or so back, and after he left he wrote an extremely dry book about what he found there. I've forgotten about him. Do you have a copy? Cimorene asked hopefully. No, Kazul said, but I don't think the Society of Wizards does either. There weren't very many of them printed, and a lot of those were lost in a flood a few years ago. Some hero or other shoved a giant into a lake to drown him. The silly Clench didn't realize that if he put something that big into a lake, the water would have to go somewhere. Well, that doesn't do us much good, Cimorene says. It's nice that the Society of Wizards doesn't have a copy of that book, but if we can't get a hold of one either... Why, I didn't say that, Kazul said. I don't have a copy of myself, but I know who does. Who? Cimorene said impatiently. Morwen. I'm afraid you're not going to be able to work on that fireproofing spell of yours tomorrow. We're going to take a trip to the enchanted forest instead. And that is the end of our chapter. So we've learned a little bit more about what the wizards might be up to, and it sounds like there's some exciting developments coming. I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, and I will see you again for our next chapter on Monday.